You're listening to the Alchemical Tech Revolution, and I am your host, Wayne McRoy. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are around the world tonight. We're going to ask the question, is this Event 201 version 2.0? You're probably wondering, what in the world am I talking about? Well, something has come to my attention over the course of the weekend. Now, normally right now, I would be recording a broadcast intended for paid subscribers only, but this one's important, and I think it needs to get out to everyone. And here's the thing, I would be irresponsible. It would be irresponsible of me to not report this, having had this come to my attention over the course of the weekend. Now, over the course of the past week or so, I've been seeing things cropping up all over social media about some type of a false flag operation that many are saying will occur on the 4th of July of this year. Didn't think anything much of it. I thought that's just the usual conspiracy crowd being the usual conspiracy crowd. And talking about these kind of things, didn't pay much attention to it. Until a couple of other things came to my attention that began to connect the dots for me as to what it is they were speaking of, as far as this false flag operation idea comes from and where it actually is derived from. Well, lo and behold, as I was looking through things, I came across an interview, a portion of an interview with Dr. David Martin, where he was talking about a policy paper that was put out back in 2024. And he gave the impression or the idea that this might be something that would coincide with another Event 201 type scenario. So I began to try to find this paper. And as I was doing so, trying to find more things pointing the way to the name of what this paper is, because he didn't really come right out and say what it was. He was just alluding to it in the clip that I saw. Lo and behold, I come across on YouTube, apparently they reinstated Richie from Boston's YouTube channel. And this came across in my feed, and he was talking about this very scenario, and he had asked the question, do they really intend to kill 280,000 people on the 4th of July? And I think that was something akin to the title of what his video was about. So I clicked on that, and wouldn't you know, he's talking about the same thing here. And where does this come from? This whole notion of this scenario, of this false flag operation, a terrorist event that many were beginning to say will happen on the 4th of July. Well, this comes from a paper published by the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. And this is a congressional organization. And this is from the report from April 2024. It says, Report of the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. Immediate action needed to defend against biological threats. So this really piqued my interest, and I began to look into things a little bit deeper in regards to this. And don't get me wrong, I'm not out there trying to spread fear or any such thing along with this stuff or bring about some type of an event like this. Certainly, we don't want to see this. We've seen a lot of things happen in regards to government response and overreach in regard to other things that have happened, and we look and see the things happening now in the country and around the world, and we could begin to understand that maybe, just maybe, there's something to this, because these people, in this report, the National Blueprint for Biodefense, Immediate Action Needed to Defend Against Biological Threats, the report of the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense from April of 2024, in this paper, some interesting things, and once again, like a lot of times with the things they like to do, they like to come up with these fictional event scenarios that they could use as a training exercise, and this one has something directly in it. So I began to read through this, and we could see the state of things going on in the world around us, and I know that some have been talking about a news story that has come out recently wherein there was some Chinese professor or something at a university who was importing some type of a strange fungus to affect the food or the agriculture in some way, and began to get in trouble in conjunction with her boyfriend or something in China who had this toxin, this toxic type of fungus or something that they were trying to bring into America for whatever reasons, and they were talking about the potential of a terrorist event with this. That many have gone at looking at this with, in conjunction with this National Blueprint for Biodefense. But I think it's a misnomer, because they tell you in no uncertain terms what the direct pathogen that they had planned for in this event really is, and it is not some type of a fungus. So I think that is maybe something to throw us off the trail. I think it might be a red herring that they put out there for those in the truther community to latch on to and connect the dots with this thing. And like everything else, people don't usually explore their writings in depth or detail when it comes to this stuff. They just put some little harbinger out there or pick little bits and pieces out of it to try to fit into a narrative. But if you read carefully, they tell you the narrative. And you can find other things backing this up in older papers and older publications that have been put out. Now, the same is true for this. So, what am I talking about here? Well, we're going to read a little bit into this document, and then we're going to provide a little more context as to what it is that may be revealed in this document. Because they don't write these training scenarios without some type of intent embedded therein. And who are they exactly? Well, you'll be shocked to hear some of the names of the people that are part of this commission, this bipartisan commission on biodefense. Now, are they really concerned with the health and well-being of the masses? Or are they more or less planning for some type of an event scenario that they see as being necessary for the ushering in of their new world order? Well, you have to ask these questions, because it always seems to me that when they put out some type of a training scenario, these things always seem to come to pass. Now, whether this comes to pass as some type of a false flag event, as we've seen numerous times, or whether it comes about in some other way, as we saw during the course of the COVID scamdemic that they unleashed upon humanity, they always seem to push the agenda a little further down the line. And we'll see how this one seems to tick a lot of boxes about current events going on right now. So we're going to get into it here. So before we get into this, we're going to go ahead and read from the opening portions of this paper, the National Blueprint for Biodefense from April of 2024, put together a report by the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, April 2024. All rights reserved, biodefensecommission.org. You could look this up online. It's most certainly there. So it says, as the subtitle for this, immediate action needed to defend against biological threats. And this is from the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, Washington, D.C. The commissioners of this commission, Joe Lieberman is one of the chair people. You're going to recognize a lot of these names. Tom Ridge, former governor of Pennsylvania and former Secretary of Homeland Security and congressman, is also a chair on this commission. Donna Shalala, a congresswoman and a Secretary of Health and Human Services up until 2001. Tom Daschle, you've heard that name before, haven't you? Senate Majority Leader from 2001 to 2003. Senate Minority Leader from 2003 to 2005. And a congressman and a senator. Frederick Upton, another congressman who just recently left office in 2023. Susan L. Brooks, a congresswoman who served until 2021. James Greenwood, another congressman. Margaret Hamburg, commissioner of Food and Drugs from 2009 to 2015. Now, here are what they call ex officio members. Yona Alexander, Ph.D., William B. Koresh, DVM, Rachel Levinson, M.A., Louis Libby, J.D., Rajesh Panjabi, M.D., Gerald W. Parker, DVM, PhD, George Post, DVM, PhD, DSc, and Tevi Troy, PhD. And then it gives an additional listing of staff members of this commission. Asha M. George, Dr. Ph., Executive Director. Ambika Bum, Ph.D., Deputy Executive Director. Robert H. Bradley, Policy Principal. John T. O'Brien, M.S., Research Principal. And Patricia De La Sota, Operations Manager. Now that's the list of all the people that they give in the opening part here that are commissioners, members, and staff of this commission. So it's important to remember some of these names. These are the people that helped to put together this presentation and think tank the following scenario that we're going to get to. But first, we're going to get through the acknowledgements here in the opening portion of the paper. And then after we go through all of this and lay down the framework for what they're talking about, I'm going to offer a little bit more context into this. Because like I said, I am not out there to incite fear or any such thing, but I feel it would be irresponsible of me to not cover this, having had it brought to my attention now, and then potentially, perhaps, have something happen. Now, I'm not saying this will definitely happen. I am of the mindset that it probably will not, but I want to do my due diligence anyway to make sure to head these people off at the pass, because with Event 201, we didn't find out about that until after the fact. And that is wherein there's a lot of problem. This one we know ahead of time, and it has many of the same hallmarks as Event 201. So I think it's important that we put this out there so people can possibly understand what it is that has been intended by some of the people who control policy here, and what it is that they're looking to have happen here in the future. Now, are these people willing this to happen? Do they really want this to happen? I don't think anybody in their right minds would want this to happen. But of course, they will always use the justification that they need to prepare for such an eventuality because they think it's inevitable, and therefore it manufactures the conditions in society to kind of make it its own self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts. So whether it's intentional or not by the people in this commission, the mere fact that they are planning for such a thing should give us pause to reflect. We need to understand what it is that these people have in mind. What are they thinking? What are the conditions upon which this can arise? Now, look at the state of the world. Los Angeles looks like a war zone right now. So we have all of this notion of open borders being a problem and domestic terrorism being a big eventuality here in the modern year. So, with that being the case, I think the conditions are ripe to maybe pull off some type of a false flag event that is planned out here and war gamed out and scenarioed out in this very document. And the numbers may not necessarily align, much like with the case with Event 201. The numbers didn't add up to what they had predicted in that scenario, but most of the details fell directly in line with the training scenario. So we can understand a thing or two. Now, if you're listening to this and you don't even know what Event 201 is, go do a quick Google search of this. You'll find a link to Johns Hopkins, who were the directors of this, and it was an event that was founded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and it was held in New York City in October of 2019. October in New York City. And we find some interesting things happened in relation to this Event 201. If you want to know what Event 201 was about, just look back at the opening months of the COVID scamdemic. It aligned exactly 1-to-1 with the scenario that they gave in their training seminar that they held in October of 2019, just 44 days exactly, before the unleashing of COVID-19 upon the world. Now, whatever you believe about COVID-19, whether you think it's an actual thing or not, is irrelevant. What the important portion of it is the response that happened around the world in relation to this thing that they called COVID-19. I think we're seeing something similar here with this new situation that's presented in this paper. So without further ado, I want to get into the details that are outlined in the opening portion of this, and I want to call some attention to some things that are revealed later on in this document. And then I want to offer us some strategies for maybe fending this thing off, should it come to fruition. Now, I don't understand or know exactly what they have in mind with all of this. I could just tell you what it is they wrote in this document, and I can give you my opinion on things. And my intention here is not to incite fear in people. As I had said prior here, I don't think anything's going to come of this. At least I hope nothing will come of this, because I suspect it's much too soon for them to try to pull off another scenario like this. Because we just finally are coming out of the dark times of the whole COVID scam they pulled on the world, and I think it's still too raw and too real in people's minds right now for them to pull off another scenario like that. Of course, I could be wrong. Maybe they can pull off another scenario like that. We'll see. Time will tell. But my hope is by covering this and bringing this to the light of day, more people become aware of this policy paper that's out there and respond appropriately and don't fall for any nonsense that they try to pull on us. So that we're in a better place if it does actually come to fruition. Now, you're probably still asking some questions. What does this have to do with a false flag event or a terrorist event, possibly ostensibly on the 4th of July? Well, we'll get to that. But before we do, let's read through the acknowledgements of this paper. We thank the experts who spoke with the Commission and helped inform this report. We thank the National Security Council, Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy, Office of Science and Technology Policy, and other White House staff as well as members of Congress and their staff for considering our findings and taking up many of our previous recommendations in legislation, report language, executive orders, and presidential directives. We recognize the challenges federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial government employees face in addressing biodefense and appreciate their efforts to implement our recommendations as well. We greatly appreciate the input provided by academia, industry, and non-governmental organizations. Going to pause for a moment. NGOs, non-governmental organizations, they have a lot more say in policy than you may understand. And they're named here as part of the advisory committee for this commission. Let's read on. For their assistance and support, we thank the following: Steve Aaron, Mary Elizabeth Adler, Dr. Chris Bakerly, Stephen Boyd, Max Brooks, Nikki Corelli, Susan Galen, Vernell Glover, Mark Holman, David Lassiter, Lucy Mascaro, Evan Potler, Zeta Ricker, Darcel Savage, Dr. Andrew Snyder-Beatty, Dr. Marin Stremecki, Carla Uriona, Lori Weisler, and Rebecca Wolfkiel. We thank Dr. Yona Alexander, Dr. William Karish, Louis Libby, Rachel Levison, Dr. Raj Panjabi, Dr. Jerry Parker, Dr. George Post, and Dr. Tevi Troy for serving as ex officio members of the Commission and sharing their expertise and knowledge. We offer special thanks to our former commissioners, the Honorable Lisa Monaco and the Honorable Ken Weinstein, and the former co-director of the commission, Dr. Ellen Carlin. We are grateful for the support of our donors and that of Hudson Institute, which serves as our fiscal sponsor. Going to pause for a moment. Hudson Institute, if you want to know who it is that is funding many of these think tank type organizations such as this, and who it is that provides the quote-unquote experts at a price to some such commission as this or project like this, look it up. Look up Hudson Institute. Just another one of those foundation-type groups that tend to have an awful lot of say in policy making. That's one of those NGOs, ladies and gentlemen, those non-government organizations. Finally, we thank all who defend our nation against biological threats. We see what they do and commend them for their tireless efforts. Okay, so it doesn't sound so bad so far. Maybe these people do have our best interests in mind. Maybe they do realize that by defending the nation as a whole, they are also protecting themselves and their loved ones from any type of a nefarious plot. Maybe they truly think that. Or maybe there's some wolves in sheep's clothing in there. I don't have the answers to that, but what I do know is oftentimes agendas get tied up in policy making and introduced through not only NGOs, but through other various people with ulterior motives that tend to steer and direct these things. And oftentimes, the ideas that they put in place have already been engineered and war-gamed out elsewhere. That's the nefarious part of this. Do you think these people are really that sophisticated and smart that they could foresee some future event or disaster or biological threat and know specifically what it is ahead of time and plan for it ahead of time the way that they present it in these scenarios? Well, how would they do that? Do they have a crystal ball? Do they really have that much of a finger on the pulse of how these things work and how stuff like this would happen? Or is there some weaponized program out there that they're aware of that will unleash said pathogen on the population at a certain point, much as some speculate happened with the COVID scamdemic that went on? You have to ask the questions. Now, there's a lot of people that have various stances on what they think COVID-19 actually is, was, or whether it exists at all. But there's something that we have to be aware of. Regardless of what it is, it's been weaponized. And the same could be said for some other type of a toxin or pathogen that they may have planned here, or what they're calling a toxin or pathogen. May not be exactly as it's described, but there most certainly is something at play. And that's the important thing to understand. So, with that being said, let's get into the preface of this policy paper, and then directly after the preface, they give us the scenario. So what do they say here? Preface. April 17th, 2024. When we issued the first edition of our National Blueprint for Biodefense 8 years ago, we stated that the United States was not sufficiently prepared for impending biological threats. Going to pause for a second here. So, yes, they've been doing this publication every year since 2016. And they said, even back then, the U.S. is not sufficiently prepared for biological threats. Have they been planning this stuff for that long, or did they only just realize that there's potential for biological warfare only in 2016? Or is this just an active response to try to get ahead of the curve for things, for events that they know that somebody somewhere has planned for us? Now, I don't know who exactly that would be. I'm not going to name any names or point any fingers at anybody, but it seems to me that there may be some type of inside knowledge going on that they would all of a sudden decide after, probably at least bare minimum 100 years of biological warfare going on. It's been going on much longer than that, but I'm just saying in the modern era, they haven't planned for this eventuality until 2016. Doesn't make a lick of sense until you look at the timelines of some of the things that have recently been unleashed on the world. And you know what I'm talking about with this. We've seen all of this playing out ad nauseum for the past 5 years. It's been over 5 years of this pandemic crap that we've been seeing talked about all over the place and all the time, weaponized against the minds of the masses. Well, they didn't really start talking about this in a very serious way till 2016. Well, why would they pick 2016 to start thinking about it when it's been a problem for much longer than that, or a potential problem for much longer than that? You have to ask the questions. I don't have the answers, but I have to ask the questions. So they said back in 2016, when they first began to look at this stuff and put together these national blueprints for biodefense, they noticed that the U.S. was not sufficiently prepared for impending biological threats. Then, as today, we acknowledged that while some biological events were inevitable, their devastating impacts were not. We know now that had our country expeditiously implemented the 33 recommendations we made in that report in 2016, COVID-19 would not have taken such a deadly toll on our citizens and economy. Gonna pause for a moment. So now, are you beginning to understand why they put this paper out starting in 2016? They were preemptively trying to deflect blame for things that were about to happen that they knew about in 3 short years. That's the implication I could make there, and of course it's 33 recommendations. Where do they come up with the number 33? Why the numbers with this stuff all the time? The same numbers. 33. It's code. They knew. Let's put it that way. They knew. And they knew that not following through with their recommendations would lead to more catastrophic outcomes. So that's kind of what's been encoded there. And, by the way, who's the ones that would have the go-ahead to institute these policies or recommendations? Well, wouldn't it be the very same commission that put this report out in 2016? Well, why hadn't they done so then? If they knew it was going to be that bad and they have these 33 recommendations, why not put them in place? And here's the thing, according to what we get through the various language in the paper, they still haven't put any of these recommendations in place. So why are they still leaving these gaping gaps in protection against these things if they know it's an actual problem? Well, either it's incompetence or it's something worse than incompetence, but either is unacceptable if you want to take the mainstream view of this. At any rate, let's go ahead and continue reading. So, they continue and they say, this failure to act resulted in loss of life, societal disruption, and loss of confidence in our government. Despite having made some progress, the nation remains dangerously vulnerable to a biological event. As we all seek to turn the page on COVID-19, policymakers risk losing the progress made over the last 3 years. Our nation can no longer wait for a biological event to occur and only then respond to it, expending enormous resources because we did not invest in biodefense. America must change its biodefense cadence from on again, off again to on all the time. Gonna pause for a moment, and now you know why it is they want to set up the medical surveillance state. They want it on all the time, under the excuse, well, we have to be prepared for a biological event or attack. You see, it's for the greater good. So some type of a national database with all your health information in it, well, this would be a preferred prospect for these people, wouldn't it? A government database. A surveillance database that ties together all your genomic information, all your medical information, along with your credit rating and every bit of information they could gather on you. All of your metadata, all combined in one convenient utility provided to you from Palantir. Are you beginning to see the overall picture? We'll talk about Palantir on a future broadcast here. That'll probably be later this week. But anyway, let's read on. Inevitably, there will be some subsequent pandemics and other biological events that will be worse than COVID-19, and similar responses will not suffice if we hope to save lives, preserve our economic strength, and buttress national security. I'm going to pause for a moment. So, of course, they're trying to justify their position on the collection of data, especially medical and genomic data, on everybody in the United States. The implementation of this surveillance grid and network, concurrently rolling out with Real ID, by the way. What do you think that's really about? What do you think that's about? Real ID, Palantir, using their surveillance technologies, which, by the way, have been in place for quite a long time now here in the U.S. domestically, whether you realize it or not. Like I said, that's a subject for another episode here that we will cover. But certainly, we see all this stuff rolling at us now, and we can understand a few things based upon this. Look at the events going on in Southern California right now. Los Angeles, and I guess there's riots that have been breaking out in portions of Texas and other places as well, New York, about these ICE deportations. And now we have all of this domestic terrorism that is allegedly ostensibly going on, and the Trump administration deployed the National Guard in Southern California and Los Angeles to try to restore order to this insurrection type event, but I guess it doesn't qualify as an insurrection because there aren't tour guides leading people through state buildings or any such thing. But I digress on that point. At any rate, we see the ugly things happening surrounding this policy that had previously been instated, where border security was an issue and illegal immigration was an issue. Well, what kind of a solution could they provide for that? Oh, I don't know, some kind of a government database with a real ID and identification for people. And if you don't have that, then you get locked out of the system, you get deported from the country or some such thing like that. You know, a grand old database provided by Palantir. Palantir, owned by Peter Thiel, one of Trump's buddies. Also one of Jeffrey Epstein's buddies, who gave him $140 million at one point. But that's beside the point. Like I said, that's a topic for another day. Connect the dots, if you will, in your mind, though, to see where all of this is pointing, where the direction all of this is pointing in. This kind of thing gives them justification for those types of actions, at least in their eyes, in the eyes of those people who run this place, who control this place. They see these actions as being justified based upon the things that are happening that, by the way, were largely engineered by themselves to begin with, all to tick the boxes of an agenda to bring about their new world order. But that's beside the point. Let's get back to the main topic here. Let's continue reading in the paper here from the preface. We didn't get very far just yet. This commission examines U.S. national defense against biological attacks, emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases, and accidental releases of biological agents. We continue to witness diseases exploiting gaps in national biodefense and hasty attempts to shore up one vulnerability that only lead to exposing many others. This weakness is why we continue to scrutinize national prevention, deterrence, preparedness, detection, and surveillance, response, attribution, recovery, and mitigation, efforts that compromise the spectrum of biodefense activities. We credit Congresses from the 103rd on, as well as successive administrations led by Presidents William J. Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack H. Obama, Donald J. Trump, and Joseph R. Biden, with directing, mandating, developing, implementing, and overseeing policies and programs intended to strengthen national biodefense. Nevertheless, 22 years after the last report of the U.S. Commission on National Security / 21st Century, 19 years after the report of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, 18 years after the report of the Commission on the Intelligence Capabilities of the United States regarding weapons of mass destruction, 15 years after the report of the Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism, and 8 years after we released our National Blueprint for Biodefense, fractionated governmental activities remain insufficient to meet and overcome many biological threats to America. And I'm going to pause for a moment. Notice the numbers listed in that last paragraph, talking about these various reports that they started initiating, talking about this potential biological attack threat, going back 22 years, and 19 years, and 18 years, and 15 years, and 8 years, all concurrently here. You could read into the numbers whatever you want. I'm not here to talk about that tonight, but you always find this stuff encoded in these very official documents. There's always this type of occult numerological sequencing in these things, as well as hidden language, esoteric language, that if you know how to read between the lines, you'll find it. But I'm not touching upon that. I'm just touching tonight upon the main premise here, the important idea. So let's read on. As leaders in the executive and legislative branches of government, the members of this commission have both contributed to national biodefense and shared responsibility for its shortcomings. Since the inception of this bipartisan effort in 2014, 11 years ago, this is the Commission's 14th report, containing 36 recommendations and 185 action items to help our government eliminate its shortfalls. Instead of spouting criticisms, we offer solutions that address the full range of biological threats and activities necessary to defend against them. We urge leaders throughout the government to accept the recommendations in this report and implement them fully. Going to pause for a moment, and we'll get into some of what they have in mind here, because they're talking about a very large operation, and a lot of it is centered on data collection, especially medical data, about you and about me, about all of us, in one centralized database. Let's read on. Success depends on exercising authority. You can't make this stuff up. They really put this in a report. Success depends on exercising authority. That sounds very Hitlerian, doesn't it? I digress. Let's read it. Success depends on exercising authority, political will, recognition, and foresight regarding the breadth and severity of biological threats to the nation. We still believe that America needs top-level national leadership of the biodefense enterprise to address this problem head-on. I'm going to pause for a moment. They call it an enterprise. A biodefense enterprise, and that should tell you everything you need to know about these people. They might as well call it an empire, their biodefense empire. Right? Let's read on. We also believe that the United States, its allies and partners in industry, academia, and non-governmental organizations can eliminate pandemics entirely in 10 years by fully implementing the recommendations we made in our earlier report. The Apollo program for biodefense. Going to pause for a moment. This is one of the important key points I wanted to get to in this paper. The Apollo program for biodefense, that's what they named this, Apollo, invoking the god Apollo, Apollyon from the Bible, if you want to call it that, into this. I'm sure the wheels of your mind are turning right now. Let's read on. They intend, according to this, to end all pandemics in 10 years. Ending pandemics is more achievable today than landing on the moon was in 1961. Gonna pause for a moment. Once again, you can't make this stuff up. They put this in their paper. These people are so hubristic, and it's just a poke in the eye. They can't help themselves with this stuff. Let's read on. Our nation has the right stuff. We can do what it takes if we want to. And of course, they had to tell you in no uncertain terms what their intentions were here. They told you the truth right here. We can do what it takes if we want to. They don't want to. You see, they can't have a great culling of the population if they do something about it. If they don't want to let this stuff happen. Let's read on. We repeat here what we said in 2014. We have no choice. The nation must take action to defend against the biological threat. Apathy, inability to focus, and poor prioritization resulted in over 1 million deaths and over 6 million hospitalizations due to COVID-19. No matter one's political loyalty, we can all agree that America and the global community must prevent the same or worse from occurring again. We are confident that implementing the recommendations contained in this National Blueprint for Biodefense and our previous reports will better secure our country and the world. This problem is not insurmountable. If we take and demand action now, we can save lives. What greater calling or responsibility could we have? And this is signed by Joe Lieberman and Tom Ridge. And that's the end of the preface here, and you'll notice they always have to try to get their numbers in here as it pertains to the illusion that they've unleashed on this world. They're telling you that their inability or their apathy to institute some of these recommendations they've made years prior is what led to the death of approximately 1 million people via COVID. And I'm not going to get into the details of all the COVID nonsense with this. And of course, they cite 6 million hospitalizations. I'm not going to go ahead and play that game right now because we all know that these numbers that they gave us were all jacked up to begin with. All of these things that they blamed on COVID that we know were things other than COVID. It's all part of their game. They have to try to justify their actions. So they had to do something or have something that they could point the finger at and say, see, it's because of our inability to act on the recommendations we had made decades prior that this was able to happen, and look at the carnage, mostly imposed by official policies on this stuff. But that's beside the point. That's what they don't tell you. It's because of their policies that they implemented as a response to this that were specifically designed. I've done enough talking about the COVID stuff. You could go back and listen to some past episodes if you can find them out there still, talking about the criminality of what had happened under the guise of COVID. But they use that as justification now, because you see, still the bulk of society does not question the COVID narrative at all. They think that somehow this horrible biological pathogen got loose, and now they will readily acknowledge, oh, it was probably from a laboratory in China. Well, but even so, they still won't question any of the other facets of this, like the hospital protocols and things like that, that were probably more directly responsible for the deaths of many people. But they won't question that. They'll just think, well, we've got to be prepared now because something like this could happen again. There could be a lab leak, or there could be this or that. And we will be very poorly equipped to handle that. So we need to do something to try to prevent that from happening. So most people will buy right into this type of a thing and think it's necessary to do, and not see the writing on the wall with all of it. But without further ado, let's get into the scenario that they're talking about now that I think could be almost something along the lines of another Event 201. That's why I'm bringing it to people's attention right now. Like I said, it would be irresponsible of me to not cover this. Although I don't think anything will come of it, and I sincerely hope I'm wrong on that. I will do my utmost to make sure that doesn't happen by making people aware that this document is out there and that they very clearly put their intentions into it. That this is the scenario they're looking for. This is the justification they're looking for to drop the hammer and implement more of these policy changes in this country that they want. So there it is, it's out there. Now the hope is that if enough of us talk about this and enough people hear about this, then if it were scheduled to happen by the powers that be, now it will not. That's the hope, that's the eventuality, and I don't know if that's how this works or not. All I know is if we bring attention to this and make people aware, they put this stuff out there in these training scenarios. I think we thoroughly expressed that with the whole COVID thing. For those of us that got heard, especially in the small echo chambers that we wound up in during that time, now they've gotten a little bit more loose with allowing things to get out there. The algorithms were very tightened during this whole thing that escalated way back in the early phases of 2020 and moving forward for the next several years. There were a lot of us that were trying to warn people, and we were more or less silenced, shadow banned. The algorithms worked against us. People lost their YouTube channels. People lost their platforms, lost their monetization, lost their ability to earn a living trying to talk about this stuff and make people aware of it. Probably your average person today still hasn't even heard of Event 201. And like I said, if you're tuning into this and you don't know what Event 201 is, just go do a quick Google search and go look it up on Johns Hopkins' own website. It tells you, in no uncertain terms, what this was. And just how coincidental is it that this exact scenario was unleashed on the masses a short 44 days later? Interesting stuff to consider, but that's why I'm here doing this, because I'm hoping talking about this, if there is something slated to go down, that if enough of us talk about it, it won't. That's the hopes. If there's anything to it at all, I don't know. This could be another red herring. I don't have the answers. I'm just telling you what's out there, what I see circulating out there in the alt media, which they're not really giving you proper coverage of it because they're not going directly to the document itself. It's just people kind of talking in circles around some of the things presented in the document. But here it is. This is directly from the document. This is how I like to do things, because it tells you from the horse's mouth. This is not me making claims, okay? This is what they have written down in their own words on paper for the world to see out there in the public domain, in a paper that most people will not even take 30 seconds to glance at, let alone read through the whole thing in its entirety. This is a lot of how they do things. It's out there. You can find it if you look for it and if you take the time to actually read it and understand what's being conveyed there. But most people don't, because of the complacency and not knowing where to look or what to look at. But it's things like this that are put out there that give them the justification for action. Because you see, this falls back on a principle I call metaphysical consent. They see your not objecting to something like this as your tacit consent for it to be in place or to be done. Now, this is a very twisted way to look at things, but I assure you this is how the power structure in this world views things. You see, they put the information out there for you to find. They can't help it that you have no interest in trying to find it and know what it is that they're doing. It's out there in public. It's right there. All you got to do is go to their website and read it. They'll tell you what they have in mind, but most people don't. It's because we've abdicated our responsibility for things to many of these government agencies and policy think tank groups and non-governmental organizations. We let other people do our thinking for us and solve our problems for us and institute policies for us. We've given up some of our sovereignty in this way because we would rather just be entertained. That's the sad state of Western culture, but that's what it is, and that's how they view it. So they put the information out there, and your lack of objecting to it or giving input to these people about this gives them your tacit consent to act upon your behalf with those things they think are best for you. And that's why they do this kind of stuff. But let's get into the scenario here that we've been talking about. Scenario. The following hypothetical opening remarks by the chair of a congressional joint inquiry provide context for this report by portraying a biological attack sufficient to cause the catastrophic consequences warned of by the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense. The scenario describes how a biological agent could target humans and animals, how it could emerge, some of the key interagency capabilities required to address the agent and its impacts, and the consequences of failure. So remember, this is their scenario, their training event scenario for this. And this is a fictionalized account, of course. But this is how they do things. They like to use these training scenarios to introduce to you exactly what it is that they have in mind, or what has already been pre-planned or predetermined by who knows who. I don't have the answers to that. But it seems kind of strange that this stuff seems to unfold in the real world just as it was planned in these scenarios, these fictional scenarios. So here it is from the fictional scenario. Joint inquiry into administration and congressional actions before and during the bioterrorist attacks of July 4th, 2025. U.S. House of Representatives Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, the chair of this committee says, I call this first hearing of the joint inquiry to order. 9 weeks ago, some nation or terrorist group, we still do not know who, attacked the nation's capital and other U.S. cities with biological weapons as we celebrated Independence Day. The infectious agent they used killed at least 280,000 Americans and infected at least 400,000 throughout the country in a single day, in addition to the 200,000 dead and 800,000 sickened animals. These numbers will increase as the disease spreads. Many of our own colleagues and staff here in Congress fell ill and died. Coordinated attacks in allied nations in the days that followed killed tens of thousands more. Gonna pause for a moment before we continue through this scenario any further. So now they're talking about some type of a biological weapon being unleashed on Independence Day, the 4th of July, 2025, in this scenario, named to the day, and certain places named as well, Washington being one of them. Now, with the current political climate, think about the implications of something like that. You want to talk about martial law going into effect? Or some type of scenario wherein totalitarianism really steps its ugly foot in the door. Something like that would instantiate that. Let's put it that way. So looking at the current political climate and understanding things that are going on in the news cycle, we see how the conditions are ripe for something like this. They've engineered this situation in place where people would conceivably buy into that narrative that these terrorist attacks would happen. They talk about Washington, D.C. specifically, but other U.S. cities as well, across the country. So they're talking about coordinated attacks here. And we've seen all of the things that have been implanted into the news media throughout the course of this year already, inciting these types of ideas and the fear of some type of an attack. Now, they claim in the scenario here, they don't know who was responsible for this, even still 9 weeks later. And they're still seeing the spread of this, and it's killed a lot of human beings and a lot of animals and sickened a lot of others. Let's continue in the scenario and see what other details we could pick out of this. We are now hearing that the terrorists conducted smaller-scale attacks in American cities and localities prior to the July 4th incidents to test our defenses and gauge our responses. These smaller-scale attacks were largely unnoticed. I'm going to pause for a moment. So now they're talking about smaller-scale events like this going on, testing the waters. Look at the things that have happened in the news cycle, and look at some of the things that have happened in recent years. This reminds me of some type of a training scenario or something they did a couple years ago in New York City in the subway. You may remember this, maybe you don't, but they unleashed some type of a gas. It was supposed to be a harmless gas, and this was just a training scenario or a test, according to what the mainstream press released about this. And it was harmless, but they just wanted to see what the effects would be, how far this would spread. So we have that kind of thing in the background here to consider as well, leading up to what they're talking about here. So these kind of things do go on. So now they're saying, though, that this biological agent may have been released prior to the main attacks that happened on July 4th. So think about, like I said, the political climate right now and things going on in various cities across the country, and realize that this type of a situation makes something like this a lot more feasible for people to accept. But let's continue in the scenario here. So now it says, laboratory tests confirm that Nipah virus caused the disease, but we still do not know what methods our adversaries used to infect humans and spread the disease among livestock in rural communities. Gonna pause for a moment. Here's where the rubber meets the road. They are telling you what the exact pathogen is in this case, much like they did in Event 201. They told you it was going to be a novel coronavirus. Well, now they're telling you this is going to be some type of perhaps an engineered version of Nipah virus. And I will tell you more about Nipah virus here when we're done going through this paper. And I will tell you some things about what it is and add more context to it and what we may be able to do to help prevent some type of situation like this, if that were the case. And I know people take umbrage with the existence of viruses and all of the things associated with them. Regardless of what your take is on this, remember there are illnesses out there that do make people sick, and they do convey some of the symptoms that are described with what they call the virus here, and there are some mitigation strategies that can be taken against those things. Now, a lot of people take umbrage in recent days with germ theory. I, too, see holes and flaws in germ theory, but I also see holes and flaws in the thing that's been presented in its place, terrain theory, as well. Although I think there are good aspects to both. I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle, and we don't really adequately understand how all of these things work or interact. But certainly we could all agree that there are real pathogens out there, regardless of whether you want to call them a virus or a bacteria or a poison or whatever else you want to call it. Certainly there are things that make people sick, and they are trying to figure out the best means for doing so in many of these bioweapons programs. So they engineer a lot of this in bioweapons programs and bioweapons labs. They are a real thing, whether people want to admit there's anything to it or not, even though they question the narrative about the mainstream acceptance of the tenets of germ theory. There are actual pathogens that are conducted and concocted in laboratory settings that can be unleashed on people, so keep that in mind. So what they're telling you is this could be some possible variation of an engineered Nipah virus as understood by mainstream science, and like I said, we'll get more into that. So they say here that they don't quite understand how they were infecting people or animals with this disease in rural communities. So let's continue once again in the scenario where it says, Animals and people were sick for more than a month before we realized what had happened. While the virus is the same family as other common human and animal viruses, most American veterinarians and physicians had never seen Nipah virus before, which delayed recognition. The virus, which in nature does not spread easily among people, was genetically modified to increase its ability to spread from animal to animal, animal to person, and person to person, while still retaining a mortality rate of over 40%. Gonna pause for a moment. Yes, over 40%. And the mainstream information available about the known allegedly natural version of Nipah virus says that it has a 40 to 70% mortality rate. We'll get into that a little bit more here later. But they're telling you this is what the pathogen is going to be. It's not going to be some type of a fungus, as many in the truth community are talking about, just based upon that story that came out about that Chinese professor and her boyfriend or some such thing that were trying to illegally bring in some type of a toxic fungus into America. They told you in no uncertain terms in this paper what it is that the pathogen is, much like they did in Event 201. You need to take it seriously. You need to consider this. And although, like I said, I don't think anything's going to come of it, and I sincerely hope it doesn't, we need to be prepared just in case. We need to call it out ahead of time so that it doesn't happen. So we could be sure it doesn't happen. That's my intention here. They put this in their own... This is an official government policy paper, okay? This is official. They put their intentions out there in black and white for you to find and read. This is my declaration that I do not consent to this. You can make it your declaration that you do not consent to this. Because the things they're talking about here, it's all about actually the collection of data and the building of a national government database in which all of your information will be contained and tracked 24/7 from cradle to grave. That's what it's about. It's about control. It's not about the elimination or protection from some disease. It's never what it's been about. This is just one of the tools that they'll use to get what they want. Let's read on here, though, in the scenario. It says, for years before this, many experts said that although nation-states and terrorist organizations aspired to use biological weapons, they lacked the leadership, organizational wherewithal, infrastructure, expertise, and social support to develop and deploy them. Despite these assessments, our adversaries conducted the deadly biological attacks of July 4th here and throughout the world. They took advantage of, number one, our failure to eliminate the vulnerabilities revealed during the COVID-19 pandemic. Number two, our failure to conduct sufficient biological intelligence activities to indicate an imminent attack. Number three, our failure to achieve early detection of the biological agent and our failure to identify the source of exposure in a timely way. Number four, our failure to rapidly identify and recognize its occurrence in livestock. Number five, our failure to rapidly identify the disease in people. Number six, our failure to consistently fund public health and healthcare preparedness. Number seven, our failure to stockpile sufficient medical countermeasures. And number eight, our failure to communicate effectively with the government, to our allies, and most importantly, to the American people. Going to pause for a moment here. So now we have these different points being made here. And it's about these supposed terrorists taking advantage of vulnerabilities in these areas. And you'll notice one of the ones is the failure to conduct sufficient biological intelligence activities. What does that mean? It means they don't have enough data on the health records of the people. So you see what this is talking about here now. It's all about these same things that we've been seeing them queuing up for the past couple months. Well, this is your AI StarGate project. the one where Larry Ellison was telling you that at some point they'll be able to use this AI project to preemptively determine whether or not you were going to get cancer years from now and offer you a vaccine manufactured specifically tailor-made for you that will prevent that. That's what they're talking about as far as stuff like this goes. They want to use this AI and set up this grid of data collection in this centralized surveillance utility with all of your medical information and everything therein, your genomic data, probably real-time pictures of your biological condition. Real-time. That's right, I'm talking about this stuff. This is all the Internet of bio things. The Internet of biology, the Internet of bodies, the Internet of bio-nano things. All of these things tied together in one centralized utility, all, of course, monitored 24/7 by an artificial intelligence utility. This is their StarGate project that they want to fund to the tune of $500 billion. And, of course, they're funneling money through Palantir to do some of this as well, because Palantir already has a lot of surveillance tech out there monitoring and tracking everything you do. So it's all about bringing all of this together in one centralized utility. That's what they're trying to build here. They're trying to get the infrastructure in place for that. And this unleashing of AI in the way that it's been unleashed over the course of the past several months is also very telling. And then you add in, of course, Trump's big, beautiful bill and all of the pork and everything attached to that. It's just unbelievable, the spending that's going to go into this. And they talk openly about $1 trillion in defense spending. Well, this is part of it. This is part of their defense spending. What are they defending you against? Well, they're defending you against yourself, really. That's what it really is. They want all of your information in one centralized database. All of this is leading up to the onlining of this centralized database. Let's put it that way. But let's continue here with the scenario itself. It says, ultimately, our adversaries took advantage of our failure to make biodefense a top national priority. It is especially painful to me and the other leaders of committees throughout Congress that we failed in our duty to gather the necessary information and data, connect the dots, produce intelligence, and prevent and attribute these attacks. Sadly, much as the 9/11 Commission observed in its analysis of the attacks of 2001, the attacks of 2025 can be ascribed to failures to heed many warnings and commit to preventing biological events from affecting our national security. Going to pause for another moment here before we continue. So now they're drawing comparisons to failures of the 9/11 Commission. Do you see what they're gearing up for? This is all plausible deniability, okay? The fact that they instituted this, they began actively pursuing some type of a biodefense program back in 2014, didn't put out the first of these papers till 2016, and still they're claiming they haven't instituted any of the recommendations that they've made since that time. That should be very telling for you. You see, they're already planning for their failures and giving excuses as to why their failures happened. Well, it's because we just couldn't get it together. There was too much apathy. People didn't care and weren't really truly prioritizing this. And then they draw comparisons to the 9/11 Commission and how this analysis saw failures in our responses as well. Well, what do we know about that? If you actually go back and you're honest and you do an assessment of what really happened on 9/11, you know the official story doesn't align with the truth of how things went down. So it's more than just intelligence failures that happened. And the same thing will hold true with this, if this does come to fruition in the way the scenario plays out here. And they're already offering their plausible deniability in the form of this training exercise here. Anyway, let's continue reading. So it says here in the training exercise, once again, There were failures of prediction, early warning, and detection. The diplomatic, intelligence, law enforcement, and military communities failed to discover intent and provide advanced warning of well-planned and direct attacks on the United States and its interests overseas. The Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Homeland Security failed to detect the biological agent upon release. Going to pause for a moment. Notice that they lump together the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services with the Department of Defense and Homeland Security along with this. So that's making some more interesting observations here. So how much of overlap is there going to be in this grand database that they want to put together? It's going to be all-encompassing. That's the whole point. Let's continue reading through the scenario. It says, there were and continue to be failures to respond effectively. And it gives examples here. It says the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Health and Human Services still have no way to prevent additional infections, treat exposed people and animals effectively, thwart the establishment of pathogens in new reservoirs, or prevent the disease from becoming permanently established in the United States. The Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Justice failed in their initial efforts at attribution. As I speak, critical infrastructure owners and operators and emergency service providers are struggling valiantly to do their jobs while keeping their own families safe in the absence of adequate protection. Our military is splitting resources to help with domestic response and operations overseas, and the intelligence community is spread thin trying to prevent our enemies from taking further advantage of our vulnerabilities to biological and other threats. And I'm going to pause for a moment and notice the mention of the intelligence community. And if you want to know who would likely be the perpetrators of some such thing, it would probably be some assets of the intelligence community. This seems to be an uncomfortable truth around the world with all types of different false flag events. And this might be the same. Maybe this is what's planned. I don't know. Like I said, I don't have the answers. I just have to ask the questions. I'm telling you what it says here in this official government document about the scenarios they're planning for. Let's read on. Our national leadership at all levels, federal and non-federal, failed to heed the advice of the 9/11 Commission, the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission, the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and many other experts who warned of the dangers of biological terrorism and warfare. They failed to appreciate the gravity of the biological threat, generate political will, and take action in the face of looming danger, even when COVID-19 demonstrated how severe a biological threat could be. I'm going to pause for a moment. Think about all the things they're trying to use this COVID-19 situation to expedite in this world. You see, they will never let a good crisis go to waste, will they? They're trying to leverage this idea to compel people to accept draconian measures. Because people didn't like the things that happened during COVID by and large. We're still seeing the ramifications of that in our society and culture today. There's still people walking around with face masks on. It's done irreparable damage to us. Not the pathogen itself, but the response to that and the social engineering that went on as a result to the alleged emergence of this pathogen. And we're seeing all of these things have left an indelible mark on humanity. The world's a much darker place now than it was before. Humans are much less connected now than they were before. People are indifferent about one another. There's no empathy anymore. People have become more rude. Have you noticed that? If you go out in public, people are more rude and crass and self-centered, and they don't want to be bothered. Most people don't want to interact with other people anymore. Or they see you as some type of a threat. And this is all part of the social engineering that's gone on. They want us to view one another suspiciously. And thus they've had these social engineering campaigns in place for years now. If you see something, say something. You remember those commercials? Did you see those commercials or heard them? If you see something, say something. It's all about sowing distrust in people one to another. It's all about sowing division in people. It's all part of the social engineering aspect of this. Do you see how this all works in a kind of synchronized way? How they do all of this? It's very clever, really. I mean, a lot of these people that plan this stuff are very smart. I'll give them credit there. They know human psychology well. And they try to play all these things off of one another to steer things in a certain direction. That's the nature of social engineering. But at any rate, this is all part and parcel of that. So now they're using the events that happened that people didn't like during this whole COVID scam they pulled on the world to try to leverage policy implementation in place, steering things in certain directions, taking advantage of people's psychological makeup in this way. So let's continue. This is still part of the scenario. It says, we are convening this hearing today to discover exactly what happened, how this leadership failure occurred, and what our nation must do to recover from these attacks. We also intend to determine what it will take to prevent additional attacks and ensure our country has done all it can to be prepared for the next biological event in case these efforts fall short. Over the next 3 weeks, this joint inquiry will hear from the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and the Director for National Intelligence to explain why they missed indications of the impending use of biological weapons and why we still do not have a biodefense attribution apparatus in place of the same caliber as we have for nuclear attribution. Second, we will hear from the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and the Secretary of Homeland Security to explain why, after COVID-19 and other biological events that affected our nation previously, their extraordinary challenges in surveillance, detection, identification, response, recovery, and mitigation persist. I'm going to pause for a moment. So notice they specifically name the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Well, that would be in this political administration, one Mr. RFK Jr., and would they not love to put him on the hot seat for something like this? Think about that, too. Their mouths are watering at the prospect of something like this occurring on his watch. You know they would put him through the ringer. You know they would. Even if it's all for show. They would take great pleasure in doing that. But let's continue, because this is the closing statements here of this scenario they give us. It says, third, we will hear from academics, the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and other non-governmental groups that issued warnings previously to better understand the recommendations they issued and where the nation and the world stood in implementing these recommendations before these events occurred. The ranking member and I have discussed these bioterrorist attacks at great length. Let me assure the American people that while our political ideologies may differ, we agree that this committee will fully investigate what happened, seek to identify the adversaries responsible for this outrage, and hold the administration and Congress, including ourselves, accountable for failing to prevent and prepare adequately for these events and their consequences. And if you believe that the Congress is going to hold themselves accountable, I think I've got a nice bridge to sell you in California. But let's continue. It says, today's hearing will certainly not be our last. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the committee for an opening statement. And that's the end of the scenario they give us. And, of course, it's all about vulnerabilities that they claim exist that can be taken advantage of by negative players in this game, and they're planning for a bioweapon type attack as the next pandemic situation. It's all very convenient, isn't it? in light of the political landscape right now. It's almost as if they've been engineering these types of events into place so that something like this could feasibly happen and people would accept that narrative as being the truth. And who knows, maybe there is some element of truth to something like that. But we could see how they're gearing this stuff up. And we could see the things they want to do. And of course, I wanted to get a little bit further into one of the main aspects of this. And this seems to be what they're trying to drive home. And is this one of the things that will be addressed in Trump's big, beautiful bill? Or will it be earmarked as a portion of the $1 trillion in defense spending that they're pumping into the military-industrial complex once again? And of course, this is the Apollo program for biodefense. That's what they're calling it. And I'd be interested to see what they're trying to do with this. And it speaks about this in this paper a little further. So this is one of the tenets of this paper. It says under science and technology that it wants to establish the Apollo program for biodefense, which would be a next-generation personal protective equipment provider. It would look at pathogen transmission reduction in built environments, incorporation of national defense science and technology. And here's an interesting portion of it that I wanted to take more of a look at in some future broadcast here, because I think the implications of this are kind of telling when you look at, well, some other things happening in the world, like all of the strange things in our skies. This one is astro-biodefense. This is a portion of this Apollo program for biodefense. Astro-biodefense. Of course, it's talking about the possibility of contamination to space or from space into the world. I find that hugely interesting, and we'll talk about that some other time. The regulatory process improvement, medical countermeasure investment, and medical countermeasure innovation. These are some of the facets of what they're speaking of. Now, as far as intelligence, attribution, and deterrence, they say biological intelligence management, biological attribution for decision-making, biological and toxin weapons convention, biological threat reduction, federal select agent program overhaul. Here's the kicker: artificial intelligence, life science risk management, unified biodefense budget, and a congressional agenda for biodefense. So they want to try to implement all of this stuff. Let's look at some of the prospects of this Apollo program for biodefense they want to establish. Now here, it gives some recommendations for things that they want to do or be able to achieve very quickly through the use of this Apollo program for biodefense. They want to be able to develop vaccine candidates for prototype pathogens. What's that mean? Think about that. Prototype pathogens and developing vaccines. So they want to develop vaccines for biological threats that don't exist yet. Well, isn't that kind of like producing a new biological threat? That's the exact tact they took for the whole COVID thing. I digress on that point, but this is what they're talking about, okay? They want to develop therapeutic drugs in advance of outbreaks. That's interesting. Develop flexible and scalable manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. Develop needle-free methods of drug and vaccine administration. That one's a key. You see, they have a hard time getting a lot of us to line up to go get that shot. So they're looking for different ways to get it done, possibly covertly, because it is for your own good, by the way. That's what they'll tell you. Identify and increase ubiquitous sequencing. Develop minimally and non-invasive infection detection. Develop massively multiplex detection capabilities. Develop rapid point-of-use diagnostics. Establish digital pathogen surveillance. Now, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where Palantir comes in with their already existent surveillance network that they have here. And they want to utilize this in conjunction with the medical records, which, by the way, Palantir has their hands in that, too, in the COVID response. Did you know that? In all of the COVID nonsense, the sequencing, the databasing, all of the COVID response, Palantir was part of that surveillance network. That's what they're not telling you. Like I said, we'll have an episode on that forthcoming. Develop a national public health data system. There it is. That's one of their recommendations that they gave. National public health data system. That's what this is all about. That's what they're trying to establish. And of course, Trump is all good for this. Remember, he's Operation Warp Speed guy. Remember? He's Jab Daddy. And people still trust him. I don't understand. Jab Daddy and the brain chip guy. They were the two guys calling a lot of the shots around here, and now they're fighting. That is all show, a distraction for us, so we're not paying attention to this stuff. Okay? It's all political theater. It's all theater. That stuff drives me nuts, and people will eat it up. At any rate, the next thing that they want to develop here through this Apollo program for biodefense is to bolster the National Pathogen Surveillance and Forecasting Center, develop next-generation personal protective equipment, suppress pathogen transmission in the built environment, establish comprehensive laboratory biosafety and biosecurity, and, get this, screen DNA synthesis providers and users and purchase genetic material from verified vendors. Now think about that. What do they want to do with your DNA? They want to screen DNA synthesis providers. Well, who are these people synthesizing DNA? A lot of these things just are unbelievable what they want to be able to do here. And it gives a little bit more details in here as to particulars with a lot of this stuff. Let's get into some of the particulars. So it says it wants to extend and develop next-generation personal protective equipment to guard against biological threats. And one of the goals thereof is to extend the shelf life of personal protective equipment that's stockpiled for use in biological emergencies. So remember all your stupid face masks and gloves and all of this nonsense that somebody made a mint on, some Chinese company likely, because that's where most of this stuff was produced. And by the way, these things are worthless. Absolutely worthless. A face mask is worthless. But still, you see how they will sink a ton of money into this, even still, because there's money to be made on it. Next portion says, research and develop next-generational personal protective equipment for use in healthcare settings in areas containing or contaminated with biological agents. And then transfer technology for biodefense personal protective equipment throughout the public and private sectors. So they want to build new equipment for handling this. So what are you going to do? Are you going to wear a radiation suit next? Maybe. Another part of this is to reduce pathogen transmission in built environments. What does this mean? Well, buildings, I would assume. It says conduct research on pathogen transmission reduction in built environments, develop and advance technologies to reduce viability and transmission of pathogens in built environments, reduce pathogen transmission in built environments, develop health-based biodefense standards for reducing pathogen transmission in built environments. So they want to tell you, follow the arrows on the floor, walk one way. All the nonsense they tried during COVID, except they want to sink more money into that now. Maybe come up with some better methods. Like instead of maybe walking one way down the grocery store aisles, I don't know, there's certain aisle, you'll have to skip an aisle or something like that. It's stupidity at its finest. But at any rate, this is the kind of stuff they're talking about. What else are they saying? They're saying integrate national defense science and technology. Integrate military research to defend the war fighter against biological threats. Produce a defense biotechnology inventory. Facilitate defense technology transition. Address military biodefense research gaps. Defend against astrobiological threats. Here we go. There's an interesting portion of this. What kind of astrobiological threats are there that we need to defend against? It says they want to authorize the Office of Planetary Protection. Like I said, we might take another run at this on some later program because there's a lot in this that I would like to touch on, and this ties back to things I've noticed in the past researching the UFO topic. Establish a planetary biodefense board. Improve regulatory processes. Authorize or approve innovative technologies before, during, and after biological events. Incorporate lessons learned from pandemics into regulatory processes. Invest in medical countermeasures. Require a biodefense budget plan from the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. They're looking for more funding. That's what this is. Fund the medical countermeasure enterprise to no less than authorized levels. Reestablish multi-year biodefense funding for medical countermeasure procurement. Eliminate Office of Management and Budget Review of BioShield procurements. A lot of it has to do with where's the funding coming from. Innovation in medical countermeasures. This is the last portion, and then we're going to sign off here from this. Innovation in medical countermeasures. Review existing medical countermeasure programs. Develop vaccine candidates for prototype pathogens. Develop antiviral drugs in advance of outbreaks, and it's amazing how they know it's always going to be a virus, huh? Develop needle-free methods of drug and vaccine administration. Develop flexible and scalable manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. Set requirements for all biological agents deemed material threats to the nation. Establish an antigen bank. Oh, this one's dangerous too. An antigen bank. You know what that means? They're going to collect your data, your immune responses to certain antigens. They're going to want to know all that. And they're going to store some of these antigens. Well, these would be the pathogens, ladies and gentlemen. They want to have these put aside in a lab somewhere. Does that sound like a good idea? Establish regional food and agriculture advanced development and manufacturing. So they have all of these ideas in mind, and this is all part of this Apollo program for biodefense. You see, they want to get heavy funding for this. They want to put a lot into this. And these are some important things to consider. So now we've actually covered the document and what it talks about. And it talks about that this supposed bioweapon that will be unleashed, in the training scenario at least, is a modified version of what's called Nipah virus. Nipah. So you may want to know what exactly is Nipah virus. Nipah virus is a type of Henipah virus, which is a bat-borne zoonotic virus. Once again, bats. Now, there's something to the archetype, the symbol of the bat, that is massively important here. And that's another topic for another day. I'm going to have to take a run at identifying what it is they're trying to communicate with these pathogens and this connection to the bat. The symbolic nature of that. Like I said, that's something we'll touch on another time. But this is where Nipah virus comes from. Nipah virus infection in humans and other animals is a disease with a very high mortality rate. Its mortality rate ranks from 40% to 75%, so that is a very high mortality rate. Numerous disease outbreaks caused by Nipah virus have occurred in Southeast Africa and Southeast Asia. Nipah virus belongs to the genus Henipavirus along with the Hendra virus, which has also caused disease outbreaks. So this Nipah virus is a type of a Hendra virus. It's related to the Hendra virus, if you've heard of that. So it says, like other Henipaviruses, the Nipah virus genome is a single, non-segmented, negative-sense, single-stranded RNA of over 18 kb, which is substantially longer than that of other paramyxoviruses. The enveloped virus particles are variable in shape and can be filamentous or spherical. They contain a helical nucleocapsid. 6 structural proteins are generated within, and I'm not going to name those. It names them by letter. by their letter designation, and you have to know a little bit about microbiology and stuff to make any sense of this, so we'll skip past that. But it says there are 2 envelope glycoproteins that help to assemble the homotetramer to form the viral antireceptor or attachment protein, which binds to the receptor on the host cell. Now here is where we can know some important things. Where it attaches on the host cell. Now you'll remember, if you're talking about COVID, this attaches on the ACE2 receptor, while Nipah virus attaches on the ephrins B2 and B3 receptors. So these receptors can be an important detail to know about this. So ephrins B2 and ephrins B3 receptors. What can we know about those? Well, with these receptors, they discovered in various cancer studies that there is a certain alkaloid substance that they can use that seems to inhibit the binding of these ephrins receptors. And in these studies, they discovered this substance, which is called taspin. They were able to make a type of a taspin derivative, which was able to fend off these receptors from actually attaching, from the disease from attaching to these receptors, I should say. And it has offered some hope in cancer treatments and other things. So we have this substance taspin and the derivatives thereof, but these are only available in the biomedical community by research organizations and things like that. But it's good to know that this taspin, the same substance that the derivatives are taken from in these anti-cancer protocols and studies that bind the antigens from attaching to the ephrins 2 and 3 receptors, is available in a natural substance, a natural supplement you could buy out there. And I'm not suggesting go and do this, but I'm just saying if you see this Nipah virus begin to emerge, this might be one plausible way to prevent being infected with it, if it should actually happen the way it's claiming in this event scenario. So they make a substance, a supplement, that contains some of the same prerequisites as these taspin derivatives. And this substance is known as sangre de grado, which means dragon's blood. Well, according to WebMD, sangre de grado is a tree that grows in the Amazon in South America. The tree bark and the sap are used to make a medicine. This chemical in the medicine is called sangre de grado, also called dragon's blood. It's also known as crofelemer, SP303. And this was approved as a drug by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, used to treat diarrhea in people with HIV and AIDS. It's also been used by some people for irritable bowel syndrome. And it has other usages and stuff as well that many have used for years. But there's not really many studies in the U.S. that have been done on this to really show evidence that it works for these things. But people have used it for insect bites, bleeding gums, bone cancer, cholera, the common cold, diarrhea, eczema, fever, fractures, hemorrhoids, gastrointestinal tract infections, menstrual cramps, mouth and throat ulcers, stomach ulcers, swelling and inflammation, tuberculosis, tumors, upper airway infections, wound healing, and other conditions. And it says there are some side effects, even though they say it's likely safe to take. Some people have reported stomach pain, gas, headache, and bronchitis when taking this substance, dragon's blood, sangre de grado in Spanish. But this can possibly help to bind those receptors, those ephrins 2 and 3 receptors, so that things can't attach to them. I don't think this is going to happen, and I'm not a medical doctor, so don't take advice from me on this, but just knowing some of the things about science that I know and seeing that this substance, this dragon's blood, this sangre de grado, actually has the potential to bind the ephrins 2 and 3 receptors, this can lead to a potential preventative measure if this Nipah virus should arise en masse. Maybe gives you a little bit of something to help stave it off. I don't know. I don't have the answers to that. I haven't actually ever used this substance. This is just preliminary research I've done, and I hope there's other people out there that would know a whole lot more about this than me and maybe be able to understand a little something about that. But it seems to be that this Nipah virus, having that direct connection to those specific receptors in the cells, there might be a way to prevent that from happening, to keep it from binding. And especially if they really try to pull this off, and like I said, I doubt they will, but it would be irresponsible of me to not cover this when there's other people talking about this scenario, not with all the right facts about it, and presenting this out there and trying to get people in a fearful state over it. I'm not about imposing fear. I just want you to be aware they've put their intentions out there in this policy paper, and you can find this. It's out there in the public domain. You could read it for yourself. I'm not making it up. This is what they're talking about. And we need to do our due diligence and bring it to the attention of people out there and hope nothing comes of it. If people would have done the same for Event 201 prior to the onset of the COVID scamdemic, maybe things would have been a little different. But it wasn't until after the fact that most of us began talking about it or even discovered that Event 201 even happened. Well, this might be the next version of Event 201. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I just find it very compelling that they will pick a specific date and some specific targets and a specific virus to talk about in this planning scenario, much like they did in Event 201. The things they talked about in Event 201 came to pass. For real. I don't want to take the same chance with something like this. If I know about it ahead of time, I'm going to talk about it, whether there's something to it or not. Maybe there's nothing to it. I don't know. I know they oftentimes plan all kinds of different scenarios for training purposes in these types of think tank groups, and oftentimes nothing comes to pass with it. And that's great. I'm just trying to make people aware because there's some out there in the alt media community talking about some event happening on July 4th now, relating to this. So I want to get the facts on the table as to what's been presented out there in official documents. And here it is. And I'm offering you just some insights into that. Now, I've also seen there are other papers that have talked about the potential of this Nipah virus to maybe be the next big pandemic. So it's something we need to take seriously, and it's something we need to examine and keep in mind. But don't panic, and don't let fear capture you, or capture your mind with this stuff. That's exactly what they want. They want another response like they had with COVID, where people were so fearful of it that they did exactly what they were told and locked themselves in their houses for 2 weeks and wore a mask for nearly 5 years. And there's still people out there wearing masks and getting booster after booster after booster, having been sick with COVID for 4, 5, and 6 times. And still getting the stupid boosters and saying, it could have been so much worse if I didn't have my booster. And then all of a sudden, they have this rapid onset turbo cancer. I've seen too many people that I know personally drop dead shortly after getting those stupid COVID shots. And I probably shouldn't be talking about this on air because I plan on trying to run this on YouTube. But I have seen personally too many people that I know who got these shots and then shortly thereafter started developing chronic maladies that eventually killed them. All in a very short time span. I can only chalk so much up as coincidence. So I don't want to see the same type of thing happen again in the future. So if there's a planning scenario like this, and there is, that they have out there in the public domain, you can find it. Go look it up. Go look up Event 201 to remind yourself of just how close that was to the actual thing ahead of time, preemptively. And then you can understand a few things. So either these people are really, really good at predicting the future, or they were following a blueprint when they unleashed the real thing on the world. What does Occam's razor dictate to you people who are all about scientism? What's the easier scenario to believe? That they were so accurate with their predictions somehow? Or that they were following a blueprint? What's the more believable scenario? But anyway, we may be looking at what may be Event 201 version 2.0. I don't know. I hope not. I sincerely hope not. But like I said, I just find it would be irresponsible of me to not speak about this, having seen it cropping up in recent weeks in the alt media. So now we know what we know, and you can go look up this document yourself and draw your own conclusions about it. I think it's important that we consider all of these different possibilities. And like I said, I don't personally think anything's going to come of this. But if they're talking about it in portions of the alt media, a lot of the alt media is controlled now, and a lot of these narratives get leaked to it for a reason, to incite fear and panic in people, and to get people looking in all the wrong places at all the red herrings, without actually going to the source documents. Well, here's the source document. Go read it, draw your own conclusions about it, and decide whether you think something's going to happen July 4th or not. I'll leave that up to you. I don't tell anybody what to think. I'm just here as a messenger. And anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for tonight. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I'll remind you I appreciate each and every one of you. We'll catch you next time. Have a good one now.